Now we saw how the movement in plants take place, how they are growth related, how they are growth independent also. That means it doesn't depend on whether the growth is taking place or not. What about human beings? We are going to learn now coordination in human beings. Now we have so many organ systems in our body. We have studied about respiration, we have studied about excretion, we have studied about circulatory system, we have studied about so many systems. Are they working together? Are they working efficiently? Are they working efficiently or effectively? When I am saying effectively and efficiently, means what? I am trying to ask you a question. The digestive system and the respiratory system, are they interrelated? The excretory system or the circulatory system, are they interrelated? Yes, they are interrelated. They have to work with each other to get the optimal functioning of your body. Your body will function normally only when all these organs are working together. All these organs are working efficiently and effectively. That means what? What do they need? They need control. That means the regulation of all the functions. And they need coordination. That means the execution of all the functions of organ systems. So here we are going to see how efficiently and how effectively the organ systems are working in our body. Now there are the whole organ system or the human being is working on two mechanisms. What are the two mechanisms? The two mechanisms, that means the different body activities, whether I am walking, whether I am playing football, whether I am playing cricket, whether I am reading, whether I am writing, all these activities are based on two mechanisms. What are the two mechanisms? Two mechanisms are nervous control and chemical control. Now what are these two mechanisms for? These two mechanisms which are actually making our body activities work together. So our body activities, any type of activities, whether you are reading, writing, jogging, walking, or speaking, or learning, or sleeping, what is happening? What are they under control of? They are in the control of two mechanisms, the nervous control and the chemical control. The nervous control, when I am talking about the nervous control, the human nervous system comes into play. The human nervous system is a very complicated nervous system. Actually, it is making you remind how to act in which type of surroundings. The nervous system is basically of three types which you are going to learn. The human nervous system comprises of three types. I can say it is divided into three types. Central nervous system, or also called as CNS. Then peripheral nervous system, that is called as PNS, and third is autonomous nervous system. That is ANS. So you have to remember, when we talk about human nervous system, that means whichever mechanism which is under the control of nervous control, they are having the three types of nervous systems which are basically playing a very active and important role. Central nervous system, peripheral nervous system, and autonomous nervous system. What is the central nervous system consisting of? The central nervous system is consisting of, first is brain, and second is spinal cord. Central nervous system is made up of or comprises of brain and spinal cord. Where is brain? Brain is inside our skull. This is the hard part is called the skull. That is the bony structure. Inside the bony structure, we have a muscular organ which is known as brain. And what is spinal cord? The backbone. When you touch your backbone, you feel that there is a hard substance. Actually, that is not a spinal cord. That is the vertebral column. Under the vertebral column, there is a very thick wire-like structure. And that wire-like structure is known as spinal cord. So these two are very important in the nervous system, human nervous system, brain and the spinal cord. So we saw what the central nervous system comprises of. Central nervous system comprises of brain and spinal cord. Brain, as I said, it's present inside the skull, which is actually controlling all your activities of your body. Every small action is controlled by brain. Then it is connected to a cord-like structure or a big thick wire-like structure which is known as the spinal cord. And that spinal cord is present below your vertebral column. Where is vertebral column? When you touch your back, you can feel a very hard bone which is going right from neck to the tail. So that part which is hard is called as vertebral column. Below the vertebral column, spinal cord is present, and this spinal cord is protected by the vertebral column, and that is why we have these small bones which are called as vertebra, and this forming a column-like structure, and that is called as vertebral column. Then we come to the next type of system which is known as peripheral nervous system. Periphery. What is periphery? Periphery means towards the side. Now we have so many organs in our body. Every organ has to be connected by the nerves. And how it is done? From the spinal cord, the spinal cord which is present below the vertebral column, number of nerves come out. And those nerves which are going to each and every part of your body, every organ of your body, and reaching it, that forms a big huge network of nerves. And those nerves are actually forming the peripheral nervous system. Even if I touch something hot and I remove it, that means at my tip of my finger also, nervous system has sent a nerve here, and that nerve which is sent by the peripheral nervous system. What is autonomous nervous system? The nerves which are present in the involuntary organs. Which are involuntary organs? On which we don't have any control over. The organs like heart, the lungs, the stomach, the intestine, all these organs, do we have control over them? No, we cannot have control over them. So these are all called as involuntary organs. There also some nerves are sent, and those nerves which are reaching these parts which are involuntary organs, they are called as autonomous nervous system. So all these three types of nervous system we have to study in detail. Now what happens on the basis of functions of nerves? Now some nerves will be assigned the work of taking information. Some work will be assigned to some nerves to give the information to the brain. All nerve cells will not do all the work. Can we do all the work? No. We assign some work to different people. Same way, if the nervous system is present, some nerves are involved in taking the information to the brain, and some nerves are involved in bringing the information to the muscle organ to do some action. So there are basically two types of nerves. We'll see which two types of nerves are there. So nerves are of two types: afferent and efferent. There is a very slight difference between the spelling. Afferent nerve, which starts from A, efferent nerve which starts from E. Now what is the difference? Now, nerves are of two types: afferent nerve and efferent nerve. Afferent nerves carry the information from your sense organs to the brain. which are your sense organs? Nose, ears, eyes, tongue, that is smell, and the touch. These are the 5 sense organs. Nose, ears, eyes, tongue and skin, that is your touch. So afferent nerves carry the information from these sense organs to the brain, and from the brain the information message which is given by the brain is carried by the efferent nerve to the muscle cells. So we can say that afferent nerves carry information from sense organs to the brain, and efferent nerve carry messages from brain to muscles. These 2 type of nerves actually are working. The one which is carrying the information from your sense organ to the brain, and from brain to muscles is carried by the efferent nerves. These 2 types of nerves are present in our body. Now these nerves are also formed from some cells. What are those cells which are forming the nerves? The nerves are composed of first, it is composed of neurons, and second, neuroglia. So nerves are composed of, what is it made up of? Nerves. When I talk about nerves, I will consider the full tube like nerve coming out, but that nerves are actually made from neurons and neuroglia. Neurons are also called as nerve cells. So the nerves are composed of neurons or nerve cells and neuroglia. Neurons. What are neurons? Actually neurons are the part of the nerves which is carrying the creating and transmitting the electrical impulse. All the information which is carried through the neurons. It creates and then transmits the impulse or the electrical signs through the various parts of the body and sends it to the brain. And what does neuroglia means? Neuroglia is the cells which actually assists the neurons. It doesn't have its own functions, but it only assists the neurons in carrying and creating and carrying the information to the brain. So these are the 2 types of things which are actually composing the nerves. Now, how do we taste food? When we eat food, we come to know it is sweet, we come to know it is sour, or we come to know it is salty or very bitter. How do we know? This tongue of ours have different areas which can identify the different types of smell or different types of taste. When I take in the food, the front part of my tongue has the sensitivity towards sweet side. So when I eat sweet, immediately if I touch the sweet side, my upper first part of the tongue will be sensitive to sweet. The inner part of the tongue, the last part of the tongue, is going to tell me that whether it is bitter or not. Bitter means kadu. So the end part of my tongue is sensitive towards bitter side. And what about my side part? Side part of the tongue is sensitive towards salty or sour or khatta or ambat. So these are the 4 regions of your tongue which are divided into different areas which are sensitive to different types of taste, and this is how we come to know about the taste. But does it have any relation with your nose? Yes. The tip of the nose, when we smell, when we enter the house, and if something nice is being made, suppose for example you enter the house, you say, yes, I know what is being made in the kitchen, some nice pav bhaji is made. How do you come to know? You have not tasted it. Then you came to know because you smelt it. The smell also plays a very important role in identification of whatever is being done. The smell reaches your inner part of the nose, and there are the areas which are sensitive to different types of smells, and that smell identified that the pav bhaji was made. Or if some sweet thing is made, you come to know cake is being baked. How do you come to know? You are not tasting it, that cake, but you are only smelling it. That means our sense organ, this nose also is very sensitive to different types of smells as the taste. That means the tongue is one of the sensitive organ or the sense organ which can tell you the taste, but the nose is also a sense organ which can tell you different types of smells. So these are the sense organs which are actually doing the work and telling us what type of thing we are surrounded by. What if I say that I have touched a hot cup of tea and I remove my hand, right? So the parts of my hands which are touching the hot object are having the neurons. As I said, neurons are nerve cells. These neurons are catching hold of that information, and that is known as the receptor. What is reception? When I go in a hotel, there is a reception. They ask you what it is, what do you want, right? So same thing, my hand is acting, at the tips of my hand is acting as a receptor, and this receptor is the touch receptor, where by touching I have come to know. But when I come to know about the smell, then I will say it's olfactory receptor. all olfactory means smell. But when I come to know through taste, then I will say it is called as gustatory receptor. There are three receptors which I just talked about. Touch receptor, one is the smell receptor which is called as olfactory receptor, and one which is a taste receptor, I called it as gustatory receptors. So what are receptors we are talking about? The part of the neurons which are taking the information or receiving the information, they are called as receptors. Due to nose, it is olfactory receptors. Due to tongue, it is gustatory receptors, and due to touch, it is touch receptors. So this type of different types of sense organs are giving us a different type of information being sent to the brain. Welcome back, students. We were studying about the nervous system, how the sensory organs are responsible for carrying the information from the surroundings and taking it to the brain, to the various parts of your body. So how it happens? We studied that nervous system consists of neurons. But what is a neuron? Neuron, I have drawn a structure of neuron cell. This is a nerve cell or a neuron. This neuron consists of branch-like substance, a branch-like sting which is known as dendrites. These ends which are looking like branches, they are called as dendrites. These are the dendrites with the tips which are actually catching the information from the stimuli or the surrounding. I will first explain you the structure. Then here in between there is a cytoplasm which is also called a cell body or cyton. In the cytoplasm or the cell body is the nucleus which is controlling all the functions of the neuron. So this is the nucleus. Now from the nucleus and the cytoplasm, a tail-like structure comes out, and this tail-like structure is called as axon. AXON, axon. And axon ends in another branch-like structure which are known as the nerve endings. So this is the structure of neuron. But what is a neuron? Now we understood in the last chapter that the neurons are the parts of nervous system. When I talk about nervous fiber or nerve fiber, it is formed from various small nerve cells which are called as neurons. And these neurons are responsible for sending or transmitting of messages. Now what happens? Now when the information from the environment is captured by the dendrites, these dendrites act as the receptors. Now receptors are the points which are carrying the information. Now they capture the information from the environment, and these dendrites act as a receptors. These receptors produces some chemicals which are producing, these chemicals are responsible for producing electrochemical impulse or the electrochemical radiations. And this electrochemical impulse passes through the cell body, through the nucleus, then through the axon to the nerve endings. So this is how the electrical impulse is traveling from the receptors to the end of the neuron. This we are talking about one neuron. There are millions of neurons which are forming the nerve fiber. So this millions of neurons will pass the message from one neuron to another neuron. Now what is happening? When this neuron, suppose let us consider this is the neuron at the tip of your finger when you touch any hot object. Now the hot object becomes the stimulus, that is, it is acting as a stimuli. From the stimuli, the hotness or the heat is taken up by the dendrites. It is understood that it is hot. Now this message has to send. Now they produce some chemicals, and these chemicals in turn make an impulse that is called as electrochemical impulse. Or the way the electrical energy passes, same way the messages is passed. This electrochemical impulse travels through the cyton, through the axon into nerve endings. Now here this nerve endings will touch another dendrites of the next neuron. But there is a gap between this nerve ending and the dendrites of another neuron. And this gap which is present can be from 2 millimeter, 2 nanometer to 20 nanometer. So such a small gap is there. What is this gap known as? This gap is known as synapse. So synapse or the gap between the two neurons. This is one neuron. If I continue another neuron here, there will be gap between these two neurons, and that gap is known as synapse. Through the synapse, what happens when the electrochemical impulse reaches here, some more chemicals are released. These chemicals are released which pass on to the next gap or the synapse, and then it goes to the next neuron in continuation with the electrical impulse. This is how from one neuron to another neuron the electrical impulses passes, and this is how the transmission of messages takes place in the nervous system. So the dendrites are the receptors. These nerve endings are passing the electrochemical impulse through the synapse to the next neuron. This is how the movement of the messages takes place. Now from the receptors, the message has gone to the neurons. Now what happens? Then it reaches through the neurons, it reaches the brain part. Now this brain here, it is integrating all the types of various information which is coming from not only from the fingers, but it is getting the information from all the parts of your body. Then what does the brain do? The brain thinks about all the different types of information. Decipher is try to understand which messages to send to through what. Now if we are taking the example of hot object, I touch the hot object, the message is passed on to the brain. That brain will send the message through a neuron which will be called as effector neuron. We learned about efferent and efferent nerve. Now here efferent neuron is called the neuron which is carrying the information from the brain to the muscle. Why it has to carry to the muscle? Because example I touched the hot object, I removed the hand. Removal of the hand, who is giving this information? Who is giving this message? So the brain is giving us the message that remove the hand. Okay, so that is done by the effector neuron or the effector nerve. And this effector nerve, how does it take place? Now I am removing my hand. That means I am contracting some of the cells to remove my hand. How does it happen? How the muscles take place? Muscles give the direction to what type of action has to be done. Now this muscles contract as required. Now these muscle cells are also containing some type of proteins, and when the electrical impulse is passing by, these proteins make your cell contract. And so proteins have a very important role in the contraction of the muscles and removing your hands from the hot object. So this is called as the action of the muscles which take place after the message has come from the brain. Now when based on the neurons, so many types of neurons are there. So which type of neurons are working where? So I can say the neurons are of three types. Now first type, the neurons which are present on the sense organs. What are the sense organs? The sense organs which we studied, that the organs which are actually sensing, that means the ears, eyes, nose, skin and tongue. These are the sense organs which are taking the information and these are sending to the brain. So first type of neurons is called as sensory neuron. That means the neuron which is acting as a receptors from the sense organs and taking this message to the brain. So this is called as sensory neuron. Second type of neuron is motor neuron. Now when the message is taken by the brain, it will send a message back that do this action. Now through what it will send the message? It will send the message through another type of neuron which is called as motor neuron. Motor neuron means some action has to be done. That means in this case we can say the muscles are also acting as a motor neuron or effector neuron. Another word for motor neuron will be effector neuron because it is bringing out the effect which we want. Third type is called as association neuron. First type was sensory neuron, second type of motor neuron and third type was association neuron. Now this association neuron actually is working between the sensory neuron and the motor neuron. It is helping and connecting these two types of neurons between the sense organs to the brain and from brain to the muscle. So this association, it is associating or it is performing the interrogative function of the various types of nervous system. So what I just told you, it can be shown in the form of a flow chart. Now if you are asked how the nervous system works, it is a very simple process which can be understood from a flow chart, and if you understand the flow chart, it's easier to write in words. See, the information from the stimuli is present in the environment. From this information is gathered by the dendrites of the neurons, which is also called the receptors, where it is receiving this information. Then from the dendrites, it is passing as an electrical impulse. It forms releases some chemicals, and those chemicals are actually the electrical impulse which is produced. This electrical impulse passes through the cell body of the neuron. From the cell body, it passes to the axon, and from the axon, the nerve endings are there. From the nerve endings, it enters the gap between the two neurons, and that gap is called as synapse. Then from the gap, it enters the dendrites of the next neuron as an electrical impulse, and this is how from the next neuron to the next neuron to the next neuron, in the end it goes to the effector neuron, where the final action of the muscle, when in any case whatever is the action required, that action is done by the effector neuron. So this is the flow chart which explains us in short how the nervous system actually carries out the transmission of the electrical impulse or the messages from the receptors to the brain and back here. This is how it works. It is carried through various parts of the neurons. Now you must have seen that sometimes we suddenly do some work without thinking, and if you are sitting just quietly doing your work and suddenly someone comes and barks, you get scared. Or if you are crossing a road, you see there is nothing and you are crossing the road, suddenly a car is coming, you suddenly stop without thinking. You have not planned everything. So when the sudden movement of your body parts is happening because of their change in the environment, and this happens because we are not thinking, we have not planned anything, it just happens. This is called as reflex action. An action which is taken place by your body without thinking and very suddenly is called as reflex action. So any sudden action in response to any stimuli of your environment is called as reflex action. Now how does this reflex action takes place? When I explained you, this takes a long time. I am walking because I know that I am walking. That means it is all pre-planned. My planning is there that I have to walk. So that information has been sent to the brain. Brain has told that you can walk. This is voluntary action. So is this a voluntary action? No. Reflex action does not come under voluntary action. It is an involuntary action. We have not planned it. We have not thought of it. But still we do it sometimes. Now this type of reflex action, how does it take place? See, there are many things which are quite similar, but there is no time. Now suppose same example, I don't know whether the cup is hot or cold. I touch it very accidentally and it is extremely hot, and immediate action is to remove. That time I didn't know that it was hot or it was cold. So that sudden removal is called as reflex action. So this type of actions, what happens when? What happens if the messages don't reach the brain on time? Messages will reach the brain, but it will take some time, and that body action doesn't have that much time to act. So what happens here? They take a shortcut. Now what happens in the shortcut method? Now our brain and the spinal cord are attached, and it comes under central nervous system, right? The central nervous system is constituted by brain and the spinal cord. There are nerves coming out from the brain which are called as cranial nerves, and the nerves which are coming out from the spinal cord are called as spinal nerves. So what happens? Now if sudden action has to be done, sudden change in the environment is there and sudden action has to be done. So the messages or the impulses, they are taken up by the receptors, sent it through the afferent neuron. Afferent neuron, the neuron which is actually the sensory neuron. It goes to the spinal cord, which is the nearest. It doesn't go to the brain because everything has to go through the spinal cord. So what happens? It goes to the spinal cord. The spinal cord does the interpretation. That means it decides what to do. It sends the message back to the effector nerve without consulting the brain. In simple terms, it does not consult the brain. It only sends the message that such action should be taken in case some accidents happen. So if some sudden action is done, the receptors take the information, the sensory neuron take it instead of to the brain to the spinal cord. The spinal cord where it is nearest. The spinal cord takes the decision, sends the message back through the motor nerve, and this arc which is formed is called as reflex arc. So the reflex action is completed by using reflex arc instead of the whole procedure first going to the brain and then coming. Brain is sent the message, but the shortcut method is taken by the body where the spinal cord takes the decision and sends the sensory neurons to the motor neurons to do the action immediately. One more example I will take. Now you are doing some work, normally you are sitting and suddenly some bright light is put in your eyes. What will be your sudden reaction? Sudden reaction will be you will close your eyes, right? Your eyelids will close. You will tend to close your eyes. Why are you doing so? Who told you? Did you think of that? You never thought that someone will come, put a bright light in my eyes and I will close my eyes. So this was a reflex action. Your reflex action was to close the eyelids. Now what are these eyelids made up of? Eyelids are nothing but the very thin muscles over your eyes. Now what has happened in this? The bright light is the stimuli, right? Now the eyes are the sensory organs. Those eyes have taken the information, sent it through the nerves to the spinal cord, and that nerve is called sensory neuron. That sensory neuron is taking it to the spinal cord. Now spinal cord is taking the decision that the eyes has to be closed. Now through what it will send this message? It will send the message through some motor neuron which will do the action. Now side by side it has sent a message to the brain that a bright light has come, I need to close my eyes, and this all thing happens within a fraction of a second. So the eyes are the receptors, that is the sensory organ. Eyes are connected to the nerves, which are the sensory neurons. It goes to the spinal cord. Spinal cord is a part of CNS or central nervous system. From the spinal cord, the message is coming back to your eyes, that the motor neuron is carrying the message that close your eyes. So that final action is done by the muscle part, which is the eyelid, and that is a thin muscle part over your eyes. This, what I said, is the smallest reflex arc which will produce action which we want in the closing of the eyes. This type of reflex arc is formed when sudden change in the environment comes, and instead of sending it to the brain, waiting for the brain to send the message, the spinal cord is taking all the decisions and sending only the message to the brain that this such type of action is being taken. This is called as reflex arc. Now we were discussing about reflex action and reflex arc. So all this is associated with the brain and the spinal cord. Now what are brain and spinal cord? The brain and spinal cord are the two parts of the central nervous system, or CNS. CNS stands for Central Nervous System. This brain and the spinal cord are the two parts of the central nervous system. Now what is brain? Brain is a very delicate organ. It is a muscular organ and very delicate organ. So it has to be protected. So where is brain present? You say here, head. But this is a hard substance. This is a bony structure, or we call it as a skull. And when the brain is present inside or below the skull, that skull actually is known as cranium. So the brain is present under the cranium. Why the cranium? Bony structure? Because the brain is actually the controlling system of your body, and if it gets injured, your whole body may get injured. So it has to be protected. It is very delicate part, and it is the most thinking part of your whole body. So this brain is present under the cranium. This cranium is the bony structure. In between the cranium, there are some membranes which are filling up the gap between the cranium and the brain. Now this is a hard structure. Inside the brain is present. In between the brain and the cranium is soft structure which is known as meningitis. Meningitis. This is filling up the gap between the cranium and the brain. In the brain, there are some cavities present. Those cavities are known as ventricles. So these ventricles are actually the cavities present in the brain. Now here, this is the structure of brain. Some cavities means you can say a small type of holes, or some gaps are present. Those are called the cavities, and those are known as the ventricles in the brain. There are some cavities present on the spinal cord also. When you touch your backside, you will see the very hard structure. That is the vertebral column. The spinal cord is present below the vertebral column. The vertebral column is the protective layer over the spinal cord. When I say cord, cord means in wire also is called cord. So it is a thick wire. It is a thick wire coming out from your brain through the neck area, and it is present having number of nerves connected to it, and that is why it has to be covered by a hard structure which is vertebral column. Now this spinal cord also has some cavities in between. That means cavities means some spaces in between, and that spaces here is called as central cavity. Central cavity or central canal. And here the brain has cavities which are called as ventricles. So three things you have to remember. Meninges are the soft part which are between the cranium and the brain. So there should be some cushioning area, and that cushioning area is given by meninges. Now there are some cavities or the areas which can be called as holes, which are called as ventricles in the brain. And these cavities are also present in the spinal cord, and those cavities are known as central canal. The cavities of the brain, ventricles, and the cavities of the spinal cord, central canal, and the cushioning area of the brain, that is meninges, are covered by a fluid which is known as cerebrospinal fluid. Its short form is CSF. You will find in many books directly they write CSF. So what is CSF? It is nothing but cerebrospinal fluid. That fluid is actually covering all this meninges, ventricles and central canal, so that any sudden shock is coming to the brain, it protects the brain. This is mainly to protect the brain and the spinal cord. This type of cushioning or this type of fluid is present which protects them from the sudden shock. So this was about the brain and the spinal cord. The brain has been divided into three major parts: the forebrain, the midbrain and the hindbrain. Forebrain means the brain which is in the front here, midbrain here and the hindbrain backside. So here when I draw a diagram, this part is the forebrain, the middle part will be the midbrain and the lower part will be known as the hindbrain. The forebrain is called as the thinking part of your brain. All the thinking process, when you think, that means when the sensory organs are bringing some information, you start thinking, and that thinking part is done by the forebrain or the brain which is here in the front part. This is also called as thinking part. And the midbrain and the hindbrain, they are involved in involuntary actions also, they are involved in balancing part also. So many times when we are very creative, we say our right side brain is working. When we say I am very good at writing, then you say or when I am very good in speaking, then you say yours forebrain or the left side of the brain is working very nicely. Everyone's brain will work on one side better than the other. So these facts we are going to see, but the forebrain is called as a thinking brain, which is mostly doing the work of voluntary action. When I say voluntary action, that means the actions which are thought by you, which are planned by you, and you know that you are doing. So that type of actions is carried out by the forebrain, and involuntary actions are carried out by the midbrain and the hindbrain. The forebrain, the midbrain consists of where this is the structure of the brain, where you have to learn the structure and remember the label the parts. Generally in the SSC question paper, you will be asked to draw the structure of brain. So out of so many labeling, at least 4 major labeling should be known to you. Cerebrum is the part of forebrain. Cerebellum and medulla oblongata is the part of midbrain and hindbrain. This is very important. This cerebrum, cerebellum and medulla oblongata, these parts should be labeled always. Pituitary gland is near the brain, near the midbrain here, backside. What is pituitary gland? It's not part of the brain. It's a gland which is called as the master gland, which is controlling all the other types of glands which are secreting hormones, and hormones are responsible for your growth. So we can say the pituitary gland is the master gland which is actually controlling all your body, all the glands in your body. Pineal body is a part of the midbrain which is also involved in the involuntary actions. The forebrain, also known as the cerebrum, it is, as I said, it is the thinking part. All the thinking part, the writing part, the speaking part, it is the part which is actually receiving the sensory information from different environment. So any type of information which is coming, first it is coming to the cerebrum part or the forebrain part. Once it comes, so there are various areas divided in the brain. Which area will do which work? All the parts of the brain are not involved in all the actions. So all the actions, that means the memory part, or you can say the touch part, or you can say the hearing part or the smell part, that all are different areas which are allotted to the brain. And that's why this type of centers where the interpretation takes place. Interpretation means when the information comes to us, we have to understand what is that information. So there are some various parts of your brain which are working for it. and those parts which are actually trying to understand, those parts are called as association centers. So association centers are the areas which are receiving the sensory information, interpreting it, and trying to send the message what to do. So these are the some of the types of work which the brain is doing. Forebrain, mostly it is doing the voluntary work, and midbrain and hindbrain, mostly it is doing the involuntary work. Along with the involuntary work, the balancing part. Now where do you need balancing? I am standing, that means I am balancing my whole body on two legs. You must have seen a small child, a newborn baby up to the age of 1. Can they walk? They cannot walk. Why? Because at the age of 8 months, 9 months, they try to walk, they fall down, they again stand up, they again try to walk. This is happening because their brains are still developing. Their hindbrain is still developing, and that is why that balancing has not come into their body. So once the balancing is developed, or the balancing part of the brain is developed, the child starts walking very fast. A small child is taught to hold a pen. Now you are an elder person, you can easily hold a pen, but give a pen to a small child. Can he hold? He doesn't know how to use his motor nerves or the fingers to hold a pencil and write. That means his brain is still developing. So all this balancing part, all these involuntary actions are done by the midbrain and the hindbrain, and all the thinking part is done, or the interpretation part is done by the forebrain. There are on your book, in your book 142 page, there are some questions which we have to classify. That means which is voluntary action and which is involuntary action. I'll just read out one by one and we can discuss. First action is coughing. Khub khokla ala, khub coughing. Is it voluntary or is it involuntary? Now think, will I like to cough like that? No. The coughing is involuntary action. It is not under my control. So you'll write it is the involuntary action. Food getting digested. I have eaten the food. Now my work is done. But can you stop this food from getting digested? No. That means it is an involuntary action. It is nothing against your will. It is not going as per your wish. So it is involuntary action. Moving a table. I move a table. Now this is a voluntary action. If I don't want to move, I will not move. It is not compulsory for me. So if I am moving a table, I have planned it. That means it is a voluntary action. Kicking a ball. Again, it's my wish whether I kick a ball or not. So it is coming as voluntary action. Beating of heart. This heart will beat as long as you live, whether you like or whether you don't like. So that means the beating of heart cannot be stopped, and this is a involuntary action. Release of hormones into the blood. Hormones are released by glands, and these glands are not our wish, our control wish. That means we cannot wish that I want to stop my glands from working. You cannot say that. It will work as the growth takes place. It's all natural process, and this is involuntary action. Flying a kite. It's my wish whether I fly a kite or not. So it's a voluntary action. Function of the kidneys. Now kidneys will do their work whether you like it or don't like it. That means it is a involuntary action. So these are we can classify such type of actions as voluntary or involuntary. Now it is very interesting to note that if I divide the brain into half, the left side of the brain will control my right side of the body, and my right side of the brain will control my left side of the body. This is an interesting fact which you should know at this age. The right side of my brain is actually the artistic ability of my body. If I am a good artist, that means my right side of the brain is working more or better than the left side of the brain. Now, do you know how much we can remember? If I give you a number, phone number, and I say immediately repeat, it's very difficult for us to remember. That means for some things we have a very short-term memory. We do not remember. Many times if we go on saying this number, then you remember. But randomly if I give you one number, 10 digit, 12 digit, 15 digit number, can you remember? It's difficult. So that is called as short term memory. Long term memory, when you have gone to some place and those images are in your mind, then after many years also you say, yes, that year, some 15 years back, I went on that trek, I went to that picnic and I had so much fun. That means your memory is very strong in that part. So this type of memory is called as long term memory. So there are many things which remains in your mind for very short time. We call it a short term memory, and which remains the whole life or almost the whole life. It's a long term memory.